Started. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Public Safety Committee today. Commissioner O'Connor is out of town, so I am standing in for him, and I'm glad to be joined by my colleagues around this table. So we have a pretty full agenda today. We have 4 items before us. We're going to start with an update from our police department on the potential use of small unmanned aircraft systems. Then we will turn to our fire department for their annual report. We have our 61st District Court here today to provide an update on the eviction diversion initiative. And then we'll get an update from city staff regarding the recent public health and safety community engagement sessions. And this is in follow-up to a number of community conversations we've had related to public safety, both downtown and in some of our neighborhoods. So with that, we'll get started, and I'll turn to our chief, Chief Winstrom.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners, and committee members for having me today. I just want to say I'm joined by Captain David Siver of the Training Engagement Unit and Sergeant Frank Barthel of our Traffic Enforcement Unit, as well as Deputy Chief Joseph Trigg here today. I want to talk about SUASs, which stands for Small Unmanned Aerial Systems. And as you can probably recall, just a short time ago, we revised the strategic plan, focusing on our priorities of safety, innovation, and engagement. And what we want to do today is just talk about how SUASs can fall into those priorities. Of course, safety, providing additional safety for our residents and visitors, innovation using technology to the best of the ability, but also as a tool of efficiency, getting more of our officers. As you know, we're shorthanded, and to be able to clear officers quickly from scenes, use less officers on certain things, and engagement. We're not going to do this in a vacuum. Obviously, I'm here to discuss it with you, to present it to the public, and then we're going to talk to the community about it to see how the city of Grand Rapids envisions that if they want drones to be used, how that would come about. And, you know, on the way over here, I checked my email in the car. I was not driving. The deputy chief was, but I checked my email, and I got an email from Marlon Lynch, my friend, and the chief of Michigan State University Police. And it was just a thank you email for the 8 officers that we sent over with our rescue vehicle the night, February 13th, I believe it was, the tragic mass shooting that they had over there. And it really stuck in my mind as I drove over here, the timing of that, because we never want to be thinking about those tragic incidents that we really do need the best equipment for. We need a properly equipped police department. I'm not coming to the conclusion that we absolutely have to have drones. Like I said, a city's entitled to be policed, not a city wants to be policed. But I'm talking a lot of our neighbors, Battle Creek, a lot of departments, chiefs I talked to this winter at our Michigan Chiefs of Police Conference, that departments as small as 15 officers with drones, because they know that they add efficiency, and in critical situations, they help immensely. So I'm going to turn it over to Captain Siver to start talking about the potential use of drones for the police department.
Thanks, Chief. Welcome, Captain.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. Like Chief mentioned, why are they needed? So, like Chief said, we're the second largest municipal agency in the state, and we don't have that technology, right? And to leverage some of the technology that's out there and to increase our efficiency, Sergeant Barthel is our traffic construction expert for the agency, and he's going to speak to some of the economic impact of road closures, the cost that is per minute, which is pretty substantial. We'll have an immediate savings in turn if the drone program is accepted by the community and voted on by the commission. And also our crime scene reconstructionists, our forensics units, would utilize them for, again, a more efficient reconstruction and also a much more accurate portrayal of that crime scene as opposed to being on the ground floor. We obviously have several large-scale events. The Riverbank Run's coming up here in a couple months. We get 20,000 runners downtown. So the technology you'll see in the videos, it just offers a pretty unique perspective and allows us to deploy our manpower and our resources in a much more efficient way. And I would offer the suggestion that it does offer the reduction of level of government intrusion by allowing us not to dispatch officers to certain things or to send police officers to certain things because we can see it from a bird's eye view. So this is just an example of three different platforms. This company is DGI, which has about 75% of the market share for the public safety community, municipal, county sheriff, state agencies. So the one on the top left is the Mavic 3 Enterprise. It's a pretty small unit, about not quite a foot around as the propellers are put out. And then that Matrice 30T is the middle one, and then the large scale one on the bottom right. So those are kind of what the common systems that are utilized by agencies and for various different things. For large scale events, that middle one would probably be the go-to, and that can stay up in the air for, depending on the weather conditions and whatnot, for roughly 30 to 40 minutes. So it gives you a pretty big time, as opposed to the small upper left one is probably only in the 20-minute range. So this just gives you a little better perspective. That is the Mavic Enterprise, which gives you a point of reference of how large that is, handheld. And then on the right-hand side, there's a Pelican case or a hard-shelled case that could be stored and transported in and deployed out of a cruiser or a vehicle by our folks. Oops, went the wrong way. So some privacy concerns. Obviously, we have a surveillance policy in the city, and in conjunction with that, and in accordance with that, they will not be used for spying, any routine surveillance, harass, intimidate, or discriminate against any individual or group. And then obviously they would not be utilized for any type of weapon deployment. And that's straight out of our surveillance policy 15-3. So this gives you a perspective of what a naked eye could see from 400 feet compared to zoomed in, and the drone actually down to 83 feet. So kind of hard to see on the big screen, but you can't make out the individuals. It's really difficult to make out a clothing description, kind of age, race. Even I would argue physical description is pretty difficult, size, stature, and from 400 feet, it's just impossible. So 400 feet is the ceiling limit that is guidelined by the FAA to fly these. So in the city around here, obviously we have some large structures that we'd have to go around or up and over. But 400 feet, that camera is not going to be able to pick up any type of useful or concerning images, and that's kind of the standard question we get. And then even down to 83 feet without an optical zoom, that doesn't provide much of a visual, if you will. So this video I'm going to play for you is out of Chula Vista, California. And this is a different program, but it shows you the drone's capability and how that kind of de-escalation, intelligence gathering, all these features that the drones are so good at, it allows. So this drone is launched on, I'm going to start it and then talk through it here, but it's launched on a call of a man with a gun at a restaurant. You can see him waving that gun around. There's people milling about, and that's kind of the first clue that maybe this isn't a real gun, because nobody seems too concerned. You can see that gentleman in the red there is walking right by that individual. But he's sitting at a park bench, right, or a picnic table with supposedly a gun. That's a pretty concerning issue. You imagine that happened downtown, the kind of police response we would expect. But with this drone, and after a few minutes, you can see he ends up lighting a cigarette. So it's a lighter gun, right? So with that technology, the drone overhead, feeding the intelligence back to units responding, a potentially tragic incident was avoided. Right, and then also the perspective of not having multiple police cars driving lights and siren emergency mode to get there, because they're getting this live intelligence live time. So for the sake of brevity, I'm just going to fast forward, but he ends up lighting that cigarette with that handheld gun. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sergeant Barthel to go through some of the economics and the immediate benefits we could see with a proposed program.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Immediate benefits that we expect with the SUAS, and again, the Chief and Captain Cyber had already mentioned the efficient deployment of resources. As you're well aware, staffing is a concern. This tool augments limited staffing and personnel. National Highway Traffic Safety Institute publishes studies every year on a variety of topics. They have put a dollar amount per minute on freeway closures. They put that estimated value at $6,800 per minute for when you close a freeway down. Typically, 2.6 hours is their average. That works out to about $1 million every time they close down or we close down a freeway. Then that's direct impact to commerce. Within that study, they went a little bit farther, and then they looked at what they call their green initiative. In that 2.6 hours, what is happening to those cars on the freeway, measuring the estimated impact of gases that are expelled, things like CO2, nitrous, particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, et cetera, as well as the fuel burned for a stationary vehicle. Just that cost alone in closing the freeway is about $6,600 in that 2.5-hour closure. Grand Rapids Police Department, just looking at the number of times that we deploy resources for traffic reconstruction, forensic, again, this is time on scene. The drone is so efficient that we're able to cut our time on scene dramatically. We anticipate roughly almost a $12,000 savings annually just in the amount of call-out hours for reconstruction, for crime scene evidence collection, et cetera. Captain Cyber spoke to this a little bit. The quality of evidence is increased. I do have a couple of slides that will address this, but there's a difference between a photograph taken at ground level as opposed to something that is up off the ground or a bird's eye view. Safety, both to police officers as well as the public, is increased. Again, I have some videos that I'm going to show you here in a second that just show the resolution and the ability, middle of the night, middle of the woods, with that thermal camera to be able to identify hot spots or animals, humans that are hidden or lost in the woods is very impressive. Again, Riverbank Run 4th of July, large group events that we host in this city, being able to deploy and efficiently where are the resources needed would be a great asset to us. And then lastly, it's the hazmat. Popular in the news lately is train derailments. There was one yesterday in North Dakota. We had one in Michigan in February. There was a couple in Ohio. When these trains derail, and again, I've got some stats on this, they estimate that annually, trains will carry 55,000 containers of hazardous equipment, whether they're hazardous material, whether that's nuclear, infectious, biological, carcinogen, poisonous, et cetera. And 5 of those, and again, I've got a slide coming up here that'll address that. We have 5 of those railways or railroad companies that intersect this city. Starting a program, and again, this is beyond, this would be next steps after city council, meetings for the public, et cetera. This is not an overnight thing. We've got a timeline built in, but just according to the FAA, it starts with exemptions. It starts with a COA or a certificate of authority. Then we move into operator certifications. That's the Part 107, the Airman Certificate. That's the highest level of a certificate that a drone pilot can achieve. That would obviously be our goal, to let's have our people be as trained as they possibly can. And then different insurance options, and I'm sure members of the city council or members of city management can probably speak to that a little bit better. The deployment, and again, this is per 1503, the updated version of that surveillance policy. SUASs will be piloted by sworn personnel as well as forensics. The pilot program is designed to be a combination of, again, sworn officers as well as our forensics team. I've outlined some of the reasons why. The missions that they fly, every time that a drone goes up would be a mission, whether that's training or whether that's an actual deployment for a missing child. The missions are restricted to that COA. That's a registered FAA document. It has to be bound not only by city policy, but as well as the FAA. Again, for my unit, I'm in charge of the traffic unit. We do the reconstruction for fatal accidents. Anytime that the city is exposed to liability through city-owned vehicles, we would benefit from this. So for the traffic crashes reconstruction side, our forensics people, as well as our detectives, being able to have the best evidence possible, so that evidence collection piece. The search and rescue, and again, I've got a video that'll speak to this, but again, we're talking about missing persons, both children and elderly, or any missing person for that matter, suicidal subjects. Large area searches. The one video in particular that we'll get to is a video taken by Kent County Sheriff's Department of Riverside Park, or the area just north of. Critical incidents, fleeing suspects, training tools, or other options for this piece of equipment. The city manager in that 1503 policy has an extenuating circumstance policy built into that surveillance policy. And then again, things like disasters, working with city engineering. What's sort of ironic is the FAA has a video of the Grand River when it's flooding up by North Park. They used drones to assess damage and the way that the water is or isn't moving through that. Video retention. Every time that the drone goes up, it's recording. Video retention would be consistent with the law. I added in here what our current video retention schedule is. There are minimums to how long we're going to hold video. This is just some examples. This could easily be modified. Understand that as we change the days that video is retained, there's a corresponding cost to that. But this is as an example for whether it's a body worn, whether it's in-car camera, the current retention is 365 days. That's how long that we're required to hold that video. It goes all the way up to 7,300 days if it is a felony. If it's a FOIA or internal affairs issue, we keep that indefinitely. The lowest retention schedule that there is, inadvertent, if we inadvertently turn on a camera, that's still retained for 120 days. The reconstruction side, which I spoke to, what you're looking at is two aerial shots. This information came from Livingston County Sheriff's Department. They've had a drone and established SUAS program for 5 or 6 years now. Trying to point out within that drone there's a LiDAR system. LiDAR is able to judge distance to the ground as well as aperture and what the camera is looking at to produce measurements that are accurate to within a fraction of an inch. For example, just line of sights. Again, a difference between taking a photograph down a road and having that bird's eye view. Two more examples. The one on the left, again, that's an aerial shot. You can clearly see that there's debris on the roadway. There's some skid marks. The one on the right, this is Maryland over the freeway. This is one that I happen to be on personally. Just from that vantage point of this is what it looks like on the ground. Very difficult to see. If you look in that picture, there's actually pink marks for one vehicle, yellow marks for another. We spent days trying to figure out how those two vehicles came together and how they separated. Had we had an overhead shot at several hundred feet, we probably could have cut that time substantially. Photogrammetry. When the SUAS goes up, it starts collecting photos, whether it's video or still shots. Photogrammetry is a process where it takes hundreds, if not thousands, of photos. It ties them through GPS together, and then it generates a three-dimensional scaled diagram. What's interesting about this, and again, this is just a flat roadway, but if you were to send this over something that had height, you could actually have an interactive 3D model out of that photogrammetry program. Spoke a little bit to the railroads. This is a shot of just Kent County. Specifically Grand Rapids in the center, but we have 5 rail companies that intersect this city. Collectively, again, this is according to the Department of Eagle. They collectively ship 6 million tons of hazardous waste annually through these different rails. Now, I'm not saying through the city of Grand Rapids, but these rails collectively are 6 million tons. Search and rescue, the picture on the left, this is a drowning victim. The one in the center, this is a child, fetal position, and I don't know if you can tell from your position, but you can actually make out the profile, the shape of that child. It is very obviously a fetal position. And then thermal. The center of the camera is a suspect hiding. That's responders to the top of the screen moving in. And again, I've got an actual video that'll show this a little bit clearer. This is Riverside. Actually, this is the Grand River just north of Riverside. The Sheriff's Department had responded. This was a subject who had fled and went into the river. The boat in the water is Grand Rapids Fire.
To a B&E in progress, 5480 West River Drive Northeast at Berries and Billikens.
I'm just going to jump to the nuts and bolts
Last saw him,
here.
okay? He was last seen in the middle of the river, directly out from my strobe. In 4817, we have the second drones in the air with the spotlight. We'll try to get a eye on it. I still have the hot spot in the middle, kind of on the eastern shore of the river, so.
Copy, second drone in the air, eastern shore, 2114.
Last seen right in that area.
Copy, last seen in that area.
The drone has the boat. I'll get over the top of the hotspot if they can check it.
The thermals, and I did pause this for a second, this dot is what they're calling is a hot spot. When anything that gives off heat breaks the plane of the water, it stops transmitting that thermal signature. So what they're basically seeing is upper torso, head, whatever is protruding from the water, and then responders along the top in this area.
Units on the boat, go down towards the drone. It's south of you.
Units on the boat go down towards the drone just south of you. Last unit.
Drone, he's swimming to the boat.
Copy, swimming to the boat.
Their boat's got him. He's swimming toward the shoreline.
Copy, swimming to the shoreline.
He's coming out.
Copy, he's coming out.
South or north? Right below the drone.
I just want to confirm suspect is not in the boat.
31, I saw a suspect go south of the boat. South of the boat.
Copy, south of the boat.
Got him up. Drone's got him. You're running towards the road south. Your light almost hit him. Turn back northeast. Northeast. Now east. Straight. Direct east. Direct east.
Have to go direct east.
Right at the tip of your flashlight. I have a hot spot right where your light's at. Look up. You about?
Any units on West River have suspect in custody?
48. I do. We're on the trail.
This next video, the county actually put up two drones on this incident. That's the footage from one.
To a beanie in progress.
This is the footage from the second drone, just a different angle. I had condensed this video. The suspect had already went around the GR Fire boat up onto land and had hidden himself underneath like a tree, a log in some capacity. And what's interesting about this one is the drone operator is communicating and walking that deputy, that officer, directly to the suspect. So again, it's a heavily wooded area. It's the middle of the night, and then I think that the deputy or the officer had been turned around. He wasn't quite sure where Cardinal North was at this point. You'll hear that a little bit in the way that the drone pilot is communicating. He goes from to your north, to your northeast, to look left, look right, 15 feet in front of you, etc. You can see his flashlight as he's looking around. We're missing the audio here, but in essence, the pilot he turned to your north, turned to your northeast. You see this officer basically do a 360. He's clearly not sure which way north is. I can't blame him. And then he converts to just left-right directions and walks him right into within 6 feet. And what's kind of crazy is that the officer is probably within 6-8 feet, still doesn't see the subject that's hidden under this log. One more video clip. This is actually 3 different clips condensed into one. This first video, I do not know where this is, but you have a drone in the picture. You're going to have a swimmer or someone in distress coming down the middle of the river, and the drone has a life preserver attached to it.
In London, this is an illustration of a swiftwater rescue situation where a drone can provide a pinpoint drop of a flotation to advice to someone moving quickly in the water. After 22 hours of being lost, this 83-year-old man was found by a drone. You will see it zoom in. You can see he is alive. His location is then provided to rescuers who make their way to him. They quickly report that he's hypothermic, confused, and up to his shoulders in water. In London.
Documentation-wise, all deployments will have a reason for the flight. And again, some of this is current GRPD policy, some of this is required by the FAA. Reason for the flight, the time, date, and duration, the flight path, the operator or operators' names, a flight summary and synopsis, as well as, again, I already spoke to the retention of the video, but it is required that video be tagged and stored depending on the incident for a certain amount of time. The request, again, the cost, the capital asset fund, approximately $100,000. How we got to that price tag, Captain Cyber spoke to it briefly. 2 DJI Matrice 30Ts, 4 DJI Mavic 3 Enterprise. This is consistent with what the county started with. Their drone fleet is up to 10. They do have these platforms, and again, it's based on the customer service piece as well as DJI holding the lion's share of the market. Annual reoccurring expenses are a little bit unknown now. The retention schedule has not been set, so things like data storage and what it would cost to process. We do anticipate a spike in FOIA requests. I'm unable to quantify that expense right now, but it's something we'll obviously have to estimate. Maintenance certifications, ongoing certifications, as well as ongoing training, we estimate $20,000 for this year, and then we'll have an estimate for ongoing years. Chief.
Thanks, Frank. And so that's the presentation. You can see Frank mentioned 100,000 would be the estimate. We've already started talking amongst ourselves about possible grant options, private funding, and others to offset that cost. And as you know, we're not coming here today to ask for approval. This is the beginning of a conversation. We're asking for approval to begin that conversation. To present to the fiscal committee. We want to do some outreach to stakeholders and some more public forums in the coming months. So while I have the subject matter experts here, if there's any questions we can answer, happy to do so.
Great, thanks, Chief. I'll see if there's questions or comments, and then I'll look to my colleagues to see if there's a motion to move forward to not only give support to have the community conversations, but to follow our surveillance policy and then plan to set up a scheduled public hearing. So let me first see if there's questions or comments. Commissioner Moody?
Yep. Thank you, Chief. This is very well needed. I'm happy to see that we are looking at other avenues for public safety. You mentioned, if you could, just for those who are in attendance, around our area on the outside of Grand Rapids, how many cities are using these type of drones?
Well, I tried to do a Google search this morning, and I found cities I had never heard of with officers, less than 20 officers, less than 20,000 residents, so cities a tenth of our size. They're pretty ubiquitous across the state. Talking to my colleagues at the Michigan Chiefs of Police, just around this area, as the sergeant said, the sheriff has 10 of them. So the smaller towns in Kent County that don't have them, the sheriff listens to the radio, monitors the radio, and the sheriff has appeared at critical incidents of ours without requesting and said, hey, we're here and our drone's in the air. This is what we're seeing. So it's great that the other agencies in Michigan State Police as well. It's great that the other agencies, smaller agencies have the ability to call on the bigger agencies, but to be honest, we are the bigger agency. We're the second biggest municipal police department in the state, and just moving forward into the 2023, I think, in my opinion, it's the right way to move forward.
Yeah, and I believe that's what I wanted you to say, is that being a large police department here in the city of Grand Rapids, for us not to have this type of equipment and other little small towns have it, says a very big picture about us. So
Yes,
I think
sir.
it's important.
And Commissioner, we have already, even scenes that I've been on, as far as missing children, we've interacted with parents that say, well, don't you have drones? You know, and it is from the police chief of the second biggest police department in the state. It is, it's something that we're considering, we're working, we're moving forward. So now I can, go forward in honesty and say with a straight face, next time I have that conversation, these are the steps that we're taking to move in that direction.
This conversation is well needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Chief, can you, two types of incidents we've had increase over the last couple of years, stolen vehicles and then motorcycles speeding and driving recklessly. Would drones be able to assist in either or both of those types of cases?
Yes. So the safe way to arrest an individual on either a stolen vehicle or a motorcycle driving on the sidewalk, driving illegally, is when they are stopped. And approaching them, obviously, with a police card, oftentimes it results in a pursuit, and we're not going to pursue for low-level traffic offenses. Using drones in a situation like that, we can see when they have stopped. A lot of our arrests are made at gas stations because eventually they'll need to refuel. They'll stop at a gas station or refuel. That drone can tell us when the safe time it is to approach them and take enforcement action when the vehicle is stopped, very simply. Additionally, there have been times where other agencies have used a drone to follow that vehicle to its conclusion. It will park at an individual's residence, and then we know that we can go knock on the door and say, this is obviously vehicle stolen, or your vehicle was driven illegally, whatever it is. So it does add a safe way to avoid traffic pursuits and still come to an enforcement option.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
Other questions and comments? Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chief, for that presentation. And it does seem that we're very ripe for this kind of technology. It's the latest thing. How many officers will be trained to have a viable program at one time?
I'm going to turn to the captain, and the captain's already a drone pilot. What do you think for?
Thanks, sir. Currently, the proposal would be 10 trained. It's a 2-day class, then an FAA test. So it's labor intensive, but that's the initial rollout will be 10 trained folks.
And then some ongoing certification at various frequencies?
Correct. Currently, like, for example, Kent County gets together and trains once a month.
Okay.
And so it would be some conjunction with them because they've got an established program. They've suffered through some growing pains that we don't need to reinvent the wheel with. So to be blunt, we could piggyback off some of their failures and successes.
Thanks. Did you have a follow-up question?
I do.
Marlon, go ahead.
Well, just thinking about air control currents, and I understand that small planes have to stay above 500 feet. What is the containment of these drones? What's your highest elevation that you fly? Or one other question will be, if you ever have a loss of power, these I'm assuming are battery operated.
Correct.
Will they float down? Is there some kind of contingency plan for that type of thing?
So to answer your first part of the question, the FAA sets a ceiling at 400 feet, unless, for example, JW is, I don't know how tall that is, but it's an obstacle, right? You can, by FAA guidelines, you can go up and over a certain distance. Our one concern is Life Flight or Aeromed, and I think it just came in a little bit ago. That's a concern, but there's apps that we would use before we launched. It's a flight radar app. So that, I think, answers the first question for you. Is 400 feet is the top, and that usually they're around 200 feet is kind of the safe operating zone or the preferred zone. And there is, if it's run out of battery, some of the smaller ones automatically will return back to where the operator is positioned at. Correct. And it comes back. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Great. Thanks. Commissioner?
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the presentation, Chief and team. I just had a couple of questions. I remember being on public safety. It must have been 2019 before I was on the commission, but having this conversation, and I know, what was the city in California that was?
Chula Vista.
Chula Vista. And so that was the city that I think previous Chief Payne had visited with some other individuals to look at their program. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So this is sort of from 2019 or maybe even sooner to this point. Obviously, we had COVID and a lot of other things that occurred that probably didn't bring this forward. So I just wanted to bring that up for context, too, for those that might be watching or feel like, gosh, I didn't know we were going to talk about this, but this has been sort of, I would say, part of strategic plan on the docket and discussed at different points, but probably just unsure about the financial implication or the community engagement piece. And I think technology can be a wonderful thing, and it can also be a scary thing, and people can also have a lot of mistrust around, technology. So I appreciate some of the key pieces around what this would be used for and really defining and reminding individuals of that surveillance policy. My question is really around what the mayor talked a little bit about. You mentioned the motorcycles and some of those pieces. I know we had, a shooting that happened towards, it's not Plaza Towers, that's where you live, Mark, but what's the other?
House.
River House, yes. And so, thinking that probably came from the highway where people were shooting towards the building. So, but I think one of the biggest concerns that I get to my office is really around speeding overall. We've had a couple of different instances of speeding in different neighborhoods. We've had some, obviously we've had some drunk driving crashes, some high-speed crashes. Would this really be, some people have asked me that as in the run-up to this meeting. This would not be used for monitoring speeding in neighborhoods or at different intersections. It would solely be if there was a determination, like maybe there was an active crime or there was, some sort of disturbance that was going on.
Well, and I just want to say too, my office, the same thing. Our biggest complaint throughout, and Frank as well will attest to this, is speeding across the city. So it's a concern. I know you mentioned, Frank, that LiDAR, it's capable to have a LiDAR system on it.
Yes,
Would you anticipate that? Are there agencies that use that for traffic enforcement?
There are. It is possible to have an aerial shot and use a stopwatch or some other feature of the drone to measure a time distance. That's not our intent. The city engineering department has expressed some interest in helping with road safety audits. I'm a member of that committee. So when we do have things like traffic smoothing and traffic complaints, there's a group of people, including myself, who would go out and do an audit. Many times it's what does this look like from an aerial view, and we're either reliant on the fire department. Way back in the day, they would bring out an aerial truck, and one of our forensic techs would climb up the ladder and take a photograph looking down. So there are tools, but they're by design, and they'd be on request of other city departments for those things. But for the intent of traffic enforcement, no.
Okay, thank you. I have a follow-up question too, Mayor. And so I can't remember, and I wasn't sure. So everyone who would be trained in this, would be sworn officers, so it wouldn't be any civilian positions?
At this time, we're going to use the resources that we have. Yes, and it wouldn't be a full-time thing like Captain Sivers, one of our operators. He's the captain of the training and engagement unit. He'll retain that position and on an on-call basis for this sort of thing.
Okay. And they would be located in certain vehicles then? Is that
the drones
that's
themselves?
the deployment of it?
And that's depending on the equipment that we would purchase. The size that was up on the screen, it's literally a case that would fit in the back of a squad car. What we could do is in some of our equipment, we assign certain equipment just to a supervisor's car. So we know that if there's 5 sergeants on the road, we know there's 5 of these on the road, things like that. Obviously not to a point where we would have a drone in every vehicle.
And then my last question, if you could go back to the slide where it kind of highlighted, I think maybe it's towards the end around the some of the costs, right? So you have the capital costs, but the reoccurring costs. So I know that there is a question about that data storage piece. Could you give us a point of reference of right now, what is that annual I mean, it's obviously, you have a body camera on every single officer, so it's not a comparison, but I think it would be good for a baseline to remind individuals what is the cost of the data storage for our body camera, and then again, I know it's not the same thing, but make some maybe assumptions if we were to cut that into a certain.
And I don't have that information in my head, but that would be through our Axon contract of storage, because right now our body-worn cameras are in-car cameras. That's the service that we use to store those, so we could make an estimate of how much per hour. And I would anticipate that if there's a critical incident now and I have 20 officers at a shooting scene and they're there for an hour, I might have 20 hours at every shooting scene on a regular basis. These officers are just thousands and thousands, if not, I'm sure we're up to millions of hours now. These would be used far less often, so I would think it would be a very small percentage of that cost, but it would be some cost, and I could get that estimate for you, Commissioner.
Okay, so then now you made me think, well, my last question is, what is the life of if an investment in one of these, in a SUAS? Like, you purchase one for $100,000, how long does it last, or how many hours?
Barring any accidents or damage while operating, the county still have some of the platforms they originally purchased. So I would think a multi-year, in fairness, but the technological advances, just like, we get new body cameras every year and that. So I would think a multi-year is a fair estimate, at least 2 to 3 years.
All right, thank you.
For the technology outlives itself.
Appreciate it.
Great, thank you. All right, any further questions? Go ahead.
Yes, you stated, thank you, team, for your report. I appreciate the insight that was provided and the information. You stated that it would approximately save about $11,880 for call-in expenses, correct, for GRPD?
Yes.
Okay. And when it comes to promoting and protecting the citizen, talk a little bit more about that surveillance piece, please, through the drones, through the usage of drones.
Well, okay, so let's go back to your original statement about the cost savings, and I believe that was for a road closure, correct? Yeah, so the speed at which we're going to get that road closed, if you picture a road like Plainfield, Plainfield Leonard, big intersection like that, which I just drove past. There's a big traffic crash there. This will allow us to clear that sooner. If you've ever driven by a serious accident, the amount of officers that are on that scene at a time, if it takes 3 hours to process that scene because we don't have this capability and we have to do everything manually from the ground, and compared to this, it's going to take an hour. That's all those officers getting back in the neighborhoods, back on the streets. Move that then to a critical situation, an individual with a gun who fled into a wooded area, who's wanted for some crime. We might have canines. We might have 20, 25 officers out there. We might have to call for literally mutual aid just to respond to our 911 calls for trying to locate this dangerous fleeing felon out in this wooded area for hours. I've been on the calls with these guys for hours. We're looking for somebody like that. Put this up in the air a half hour, they could be in custody. All those 20 officers are back. Drops the response time from 911 considerably anytime there's a critical incident where we use this for efficiency.
Thank you. It's helpful.
What about the protection of the citizens?
Well, having the officers back on the street is protection of the citizens as well. But let me tell you, so, I'm the cop, so I automatically think of safety. But Frank mentioned protection as far as if there's some sort of incident involving hazardous material. That protects both the officers, obviously anybody else responding there. We can see if there's a cloud moving this way, that gives us insight, but also something I've been on myself here many times, and that's a missing child. Not only have we had missing childs, it just, toddlers sometimes wander out of the house, or a youngster, elderly individuals with dementia or Alzheimer's. Finding them as well. We had a fairly highly publicized incident where a vehicle was stolen with a toddler in the back seat, and that car was ditched on a sunny summer day in a neighborhood, and we had to find that vehicle. Fortunately, at the time, we had our SRT team was out on training. We called them all in to do a grid search, but now we're talking about 30 officers patrol and SRT just to do a search to find this child before the temperature in that car got so hot. Where if we had the ability to put that camera up 200 feet and we could look for a green sedan, it could have cut that time remarkably, and we could have saved the tragic situation, which fortunately we were able to do as well. So there's a lot of different benefits there to the citizens. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. All right, go ahead.
So just what you said, this city must have this opportunity to have the drones. I think it's so important for the safety of our community. And like you said, the missing people, the children, the elders, and fleeing suspects. I think if we don't have it, it's really tying our police department's hands. It's just our city deserves this kind of protection, and if I can, I'll make a motion that we.
Can I get to Benjamin first,
Sure.
and then I'll turn to my colleagues and have them weigh in about a motion. Go ahead, Benjamin.
Yeah, hi. It sounds like there is a lot of really great uses for it in a reactive, or to react to incidents. It looks like that's the majority of, most of it is to react to incidents. Is there any use, in terms of the deployment, the only use that I would really see of it being in any sort of proactive capacity would be at large events, right? Like that wouldn't just be when there's an event, like when there's a crime reported at a large event, it's sent out, or would it be monitoring the large events proactively?
Right, so a large event would certainly be a time where we could proactively use it to monitor crowds, vehicle traffic safety, and things like that. Now, there are models, as Commissioner Sassi mentioned, Chula Vista. There are models across the country where they actually use drones to respond to crime. So it's all the way there's. And like I said, I'm not here to say this is what we're doing. This is the beginning of the conversation that I want to hear from the community, because there's a potential we could use a drone to respond to incidents before a police officer gets there to do an assessment of the scene, like the video of the individual with the gun-shaped lighter. So there are models that have less reactive and more responsive to things that are going on in real time, that they're in the air a lot. That's not what I would be leaning towards myself. But again, I want the city to be policed how the city wants to be policed. So I just want to say I'll remain open-minded.
So it wouldn't be used for any sort of like open collection for criminal intelligence operations?
Yeah, and that's prohibited by the surveillance policy as well, yes. And two, just since it hasn't been mentioned, I know Brandon Davis, Director of OPA, did his updated presentation this morning at Commission of the Whole. I was there, and there is data collection written into the surveillance policy. We're going to have to take all the information about all our trips that we use in this drone, and Brandon's going to be reviewing those on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, whatever it is. So there will still be the checks and balances. It's not just you have to take Eric Winstrom's word for it.
Okay. And so like a smaller protest or something that happens more spontaneously, that there's no crime reported, would you anticipate using it to monitor those smaller events other than large pre-planned events?
No, smaller protests, and we've had quite a few protests since I've been here. We had my previous jurisdiction. I was the attorney for protests. I did between 50 and 100 protests. If it was, if there's not a public safety aspect to it, if we're not worried about traffic closures or things like that, or some sort of violent agitators, which turns it not into a protest, but something that we saw here in May of 2020. No, absolutely not.
Okay, and then for the proactive collection at large events, is that in terms of the retention time, if it collects information and no event has occurred to associate it with any criminal activity, is that still retained for 120 days? Yeah,
and that's something that I certainly would talk to the law department about. As of right now, that's our video retention policy, but that's because the video retention that we have is body-worn cameras, in-car cameras. So there's always that police aspect to it, the public safety aspect to it, where it's simply monitoring traffic flows and things like that. If it is within the law not to retain that for such a period of time, it would be beneficial, obviously, for us not to have to pay the cost of retaining that. So if there's a way, I certainly would work with the law department to reduce that time.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to turn to our city manager, and then I'll turn to my colleagues.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief, for bringing this forward. I wanted to acknowledge President Clee Jackson here, who part of the reason it took some time, Commissioner, when technology was initially introduced, I believe, in addition to drone, there was discussion around ShotSpotter, and we went back to work with community to develop a more robust policy. So the surveillance policy is one of the reasons why we're here today and not before City Commission. And to Pastor Goldston's question earlier around protection for the citizen, part of that policy allows a complaint process to occur outside the police department to the Office of Public Accountability and Oversight. And so that builds in additional protection. That policy prohibits harassment and discrimination and profiling. And it also, as the Chief mentions, requires some periodic reporting in an annual report around the use of technology. But within that policy, it also establishes this committee, the Public Safety Committee, as part of the governance of the surveillance program. So there's a lot of oversight and accountability even within the protocols for both procuring as well as the ongoing operating of the drone program.
Thank you, City Manager. I appreciate that, especially for those of us who needed a refresher on our surveillance policy. So with that, because we have a couple other items today, I think what I'd like to do is turn to my colleagues and see if there is support for a motion to move this forward, to schedule a public hearing, and to move forward in compliance with our surveillance policy.
Madam Mayor, I make the motion to move this forward for
to the full City Commission to set a public hearing.
to the full City Commission to set up a public hearing.
Thank you.
Just have sorry. Before I make, I have a question, because the chief said something, I want to clarify it. We have a lot of media here, I know we have a motion on the floor. Chief talked about obviously going for a public hearing, but then some other community meetings. So would it go to the public hearing first, and then during the public hearing time, would also these other communities be occurring? I just want to clarify. He brought it up, so I'm asking.
Yeah, go. Okay, so I do have a motion. Can the chief answer that question?
You want me to, I can second it and then
Thank
go into,
you.
sorry. I'll
Okay.
second it and then go,
Thank you.
sorry.
My city attorney's over here is like, I need a second before we keep talking. So the motion is on the floor, and obviously now we can discuss it and ask additional questions. So Chief, can you,
I think, let me take that first, Chief, because I think what we don't want is the police department to get ahead of the city commission. So we would wait until I bring the item back on the 11th, and if the commission agrees to set the hearing, we'll have a firm hearing date, and the police department will do some additional engagement outside of that hearing.
I see,
Yeah.
I see. That's probably provides greater clarity to community if we do that. So this recommendation will be to move it forward to the city commission on the 11th, April 11th, for the full city commission at committee of the whole to recommend a scheduled public hearing. Okay.
Right, for the 11th, and the public hearing tentatively could be April 25th.
or-
Right.
Okay. All right, so are you comfortable with that motion, City Commissioner?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and second?
Second
All right,
stands.
so all those in favor of moving this forward to be considered by the full City Commission on April 11th, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, it carries, so it'll be back before us for the full commission. And I'll give that to our city clerk. All right, thank you, Chief, thank you, Captain, thanks, Sergeant. All right, I will move forward then to our next item, and this is our update, our annual update from our fire department on their 2022 data. So members of public safety, you should have an annual report in front of you. And we'll start. Asante, are you going to kick us off? No.
We're both controlling at the same time.
Oh, sorry. All right, go ahead.
All right, good
Welcome.
afternoon, everyone. Deputy Chief Brad Brown, and with me I have Planning Captain Bill Smith. His team put together the annual report, and we're going to run you through it this afternoon. It's very data heavy, but we will get through it. So the fire department is very mission driven. We always start off with our mission, vision, and values. This is how we organize our teams. This is how we align with our work. And I do want to note that our mission statement changed at our last strategic plan update. So if you look at the screen, all is underlined. It was very important to our department that we said the Grand Rapids Fire Department values all people by saving lives, protecting property, and responding to the needs of our entire community. And so those two words are very important to the GRFD, and we really wanted to highlight that today. 2022 at a glance, we'll run you through a little bit of data. $80 million, $80.7 million was our property saved value. We lost about $7.4 million. Injuries to civilians were 13. We did experience 2 civilian deaths during active fires, and firefighter injuries were down to 13. We are right on the precipice of breaking 25,000 emergency incidents a year in our city, and that required an associated 35,000 apparatus responses. So 35,000 times a year in our city, you're going to see a big red truck with lights and sirens going to help someone. That's getting pretty busy. Chief Lehman, this is his last annual report. He is actually out of town right now looking at training facilities. So even as he is on the way out, he is looking to leave a legacy, and he certainly is doing that. We promoted several executive command staff members this last year. We did have a successful contract negotiation with Local 366. Chief Freeman launched our cadet program. We were talking before this session how valuable and important that cadet program is to growing our own, and that is something that we are already starting to see the benefits of that. Homeless outreach team is now a permanent and funded program with the fire department, so it moved from pilot program into a permanent program. Franklin Station was renamed to Martin Luther King Jr. Station. When you look back over the year, it's hard to believe all this took place during 2022, but fire did have a big year. We hosted the National Firefighter Challenge. We had 184 participants this last summer, if you remember, right out in front of City Hall. And again, this is Chief Lehman's last annual report. Captain Smith worked with the strategic planning team to update our strategic plan for FY23 through 25. This is our fourth strategic plan as a fire department, and we're getting pretty darn good at this process now. We're efficient with this. We come together for one day. You can see the workshop and all the different input that we get from our members, and the input ranges from young firefighters on the street all the way to chief officers, every rank in the middle, and we certainly have labor at the table. So that plan you see before you truly is collaborative and inclusive in our organization. Total incidents, you can see our hotspot map. It really hasn't shifted a whole lot in the last few years. You can see right downtown is the highest density of calls. Apparatus responses are up almost 5% from the previous year, and incidents were up about 3%. So that's a pretty steady trend that we are monitoring. We did have a dip back in 2018, but other than that, we're headed upward. This is always a very interesting chart to see not only the number of calls, and I think later we talk about the amount of time. EMS incidents are up 3% again, so we crested 17,000 emergency medical service incidents last year, 17,000. The fire department is first on scene the majority of the time to the ambulance company, and we provide a vital first response to our citizens. We did have 573 fires, and like I said, we're brushing right up against that 25,000 mark for incidents. District incident activity. So we have currently 11 fire station districts in our city, 15 frontline engines, ladders, and trucks and rescues, so 15 frontline apparatus. And I want to call your attention to that middle bar chart. 2022 frontline apparatus deployment hours. Engine 4 out of the Kalamazoo Avenue Fire Station is the most deployed unit in our city. So think about downtown, think about the west side, think about far northeast, the entire community. Engine 4 is the most deployed in the entire community. And that was brought up this morning not only at fiscal, but at community development. And we are taking strides to address that. So not only for our citizens, but also for our members who are out in the streets a lot. So the other thing I'll call your attention to is that top right, simultaneous call percentage. We're running enough calls now that generally we have multiple calls going in this city at any given time. That same district we were just discussing, Kalamazoo Avenue Fire District, 14% of the time when Engine 4 is out on a call, Ladder 4 gets a call, and then that station district sits empty. So this is something that we've been watching for a long time. And the other one I would point out is Leonard Street on the far northeast side is a single ladder company up there. That's one that we're starting to see an increase. That's a trend. We're used to Bridge Street getting a lot of simultaneous. We're used to LaGrave getting a lot of simultaneous alarms, and Division, Kalamazoo, but Leonard is a trend that we're watching. I just want to, it's not a cause for concern, but it's something that we are looking at. Grand Rapids Fire Department, like I said, 17,000 emergency medical calls. We were doing a really good job at the state level as well, and even at the local level, but Lieutenant Jim Betts was our firefighter of the year. And he introduced the safe sleep training with the Kent County Health Department. So we were one of the first agencies in the area to do that. A couple metrics on the bottom right of this slide that I'd like to call your attention to. ROSC, return of spontaneous circulation. So when we arrive on scene with 2 companies and 6 personnel and find someone in cardiac arrest, there's a 34% chance that we are going to get a pulse back. In witness cardiac arrest, where the dispatcher starts CPR instructions over the phone, a 54% chance of getting a pulse back. These are phenomenal odds in our city. Special operations, we obviously take care of essentially everything in the city. So technical rescue, water rescue, the dive team became operational. We are still early into that team. And then hazardous materials. You can see the trends. These are low frequency, high risk events. So we don't go to a lot of these, but when we do, generally lives are on the line and significant amount of property is on the line as well. Critical performance measures. For those of you that have been up here a while, you've heard these terms. For those of you that might be newer up here, I'd like to walk you through them very briefly. So there's a couple terms that the fire department uses all the time: distribution and concentration. Distribution is the ability to get our first unit on scene within a set amount of time. So that's 1 unit. Concentration is the ability to get our full effective response force on scene within a certain amount of time. So effective response force for us for a structure fire is 19 personnel. When you call 911 and say your house is on fire, 19 personnel are going to respond, and within the first few minutes, all 19 of them are working very hard to do specific jobs and tasks. Performance gap analysis. This is something that is part of our accreditation process. So it is my job to formally discuss any gaps in our agency and then certainly invite questions and discuss what we're doing about it. So when we look at gaps, distribution, we've already discussed the Kalamazoo district moving forward. Concentration, these are outlying districts. We're very used to them struggling with our concentration, the ability to get 19 people out to the edge of town in a certain amount of time. But historically, we don't have a large call volume right on the edge of town, with the exception of the Kalamazoo district. And then finally, simultaneous responses. So again, we are aware of these and we're starting to watch these. Community risk reduction. This is the first time we've compiled this data for you. We're excited to show you not only the reactive piece of responding to fires and medicals, but the proactive piece of doing home safety assessments in residences and risk assessments in commercial occupancies. Our firefighters are out in the street surveying every building to make sure that we know what's in our city and how best to respond. Emergency management. We have Emergency Manager Ferroli in the back. This program continues to grow and expand and is much needed. So emergency management this past year facilitated an active shooter functional exercise. We also ran a full-scale exercise at City Hall for a simulated high-rise fire. And we continue to improve our VOC software, which we utilize not only when we're on scene in an emergency, but we can monitor a large-scale emergency from anywhere via our cell phones and laptops. That's all we have. That's our 2022 annual report. Call volume's going up. We're doing well. We've identified the gaps, and with that, certainly open to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Deputy Chief Brown and Bill Smith. Bill, anything to add?
I just, the Kalamazoo corridor issue. And working in that station for a few years, I can certainly attest the importance of getting another machine down there, another station, to help with those issues that we've identified. And I certainly thank all of you for taking that topic very seriously for not only the firefighters, but for the community at large.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I have one follow-up question. I'm curious, what is the scope of our automatic aid, both the aid that we're providing to our surrounding cities, and then how often do they help us out?
Yeah, Bill will grab the actual numbers. It's pretty even in some jurisdictions.
So our responses outside of our community were 77 this year. We are down a little bit, which we're thankful for because those are significant
Right on the front
incidents.
cover.
that were
At the bottom.
bottom right, sir.
Aha, okay. On this one, not the PowerPoint.
That's correct.
So not this one, colleagues, but this one. Okay.
Last year, comparatively, we had 101.
Okay, yeah, that seems lower than usual. Yeah, all right, thank you. All right, any additional questions or comments?
No, I just want to thank you for this report and just remind everybody that Kalamazoo Station is in the 3rd Ward, so it's important that we continue to lift that up, all right?
It is. It's a very important part of our city, Commissioner. This is a great report. We really appreciate all of your incredible work. I'll use this opportunity to also thank Senator Peters. He was in town last week on Friday talking about the SAFER grant, federal funds that we have tapped into for years and received millions of dollars through that program. That bill is up for reauthorization, and we all came together last Friday to express our support and really thanks for all of his advocacy in Washington, D.C. So, all right. Any final questions before I move on? Okay. One question here, and then I'll go ahead and move us on to our next update from District Court. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much for your report. Just wonder how recruitment is going. Are you able to fill the services with adequate staffing?
We are. So unlike the east side of the state, which requires you to come in with most of your certifications and even paramedic licensure, they oftentimes have 3 or 4 spots and 2 or 3 applicants. We had 18 or 19 spots, and we had hundreds, 500, 600, 700 applicants. So here on the west side in Grand Rapids, we're still a very attractive fire department to work for. We're ISO Class 1, internationally accredited, and recruitment for us has not been a real issue. Finding the right people for the right job at the right time has been, and our cadet program is addressing that.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Great, thanks. All right, thanks again for the update and all of your work. Really appreciate it. Okay, that will take us to our next update, and this is an update from our 61st District Court regarding the Eviction Diversion Initiative. So this is an important initiative. It was started a couple years ago. We have a number of partners in this space as we work to make sure that people are able to remain in stable housing. Hi, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for your time and interest today in this. As we tell you a bit about the work we've been doing in the Eviction Diversion Initiative at the 61st, my name is Matt Perrin, and together with Kathy Laporte, we are the architects of the EDI program as it stands now. My professional background is primarily in social work, direct care, and program management, specifically working with children and families. I came to EDI in an attempt to expand my experience in the helping professions, as well as because I'd seen firsthand in my direct care work the impact that housing instability has on families, and most typically in my experience, families who are already struggling in a variety of other areas.
And I'm Kathy Laporte. I come with about 5 years experience in the system to ending homelessness. I previously held a role at Salvation Army as their housing services director during the implementation of the eviction prevention program pilot, which is now a permanent program of the city. So I've had the unique experience of working that program as a case manager, as a supervisor, and then as a planner for that program. Thank you very much for your time today.
Mayor Bliss, you had said when we walked up, this is something that was started a couple of years ago. Probably referring to the eviction prevention program, which is kind of runs hand in hand, where one leaves off, the other picks up. A bit about our program. We built the program from the bottom up. We continue to build it as we move forward, as we consider eviction diversion to be a constant work in progress, which must consistently readjust to meet the needs of the community. 61st District Court navigates approximately 4,000 eviction filings in a typical year, give or take. However, with the pandemic moratorium numbers included, the average over the last 5-year span equates to about 3,456 filings. Just under half of those will ultimately result in an eviction judgment. We have 6 judges supporting us in our landlord-tenant work, who have, along with our direct supervisors, Sarah Breen and Tanya Todd, been our cheerleaders, educators, voices of reason, overall sources of support in our attempts to reduce the number of filings in the city of Grand Rapids. We are working toward a number of goals, which we'll discuss at greater length later in the presentation, but one of those is to reduce the number of filings the 61st District Court sees each year by about 5 to 10%, or about 200 to 400 filings in a typical year. So far, although still rather young, our program has connected more than 220 households to valuable resources within our community who offer support in the areas of housing stability, housing education, legal support, mediation, and a number of other related services. The eviction diversion program specifically, or EDI as we came to call it, came to be through a generous grant from Wells Fargo to be overseen and distributed by the National Center for State Courts. The NCSC selected 12 courts nationwide to be the recipients of the initial funding, of which we are obviously one. The 12 cohorts meet monthly, although communication occurs regularly via other means as well to share ideas, support one another in all of our work. NCSC hopes to expand the reach of EDI by adding 8 more cohorts across the country over the next year for a total of 20. The overarching purpose of the EDI program is to support state and local courts across the country as they build on pandemic-era programs to permanently change their eviction dockets through diversion programs and related court reforms. The ultimate goal for all of our cohorts is to transform each of our eviction courts into problem-solving courts, which emphasize holistic, sustainable, and community-driven solutions to housing problems. In order to better understand the nature of the work, I'll offer just a brief run-through of the eviction court process at the 61st. It should be noted that this process is specific to non-payment of rent cases. Lease violations, property damage, and other reasons for eviction often have a different process and timeline, which is largely outside the scope of our program. Prior to being filed with the court, a notice, typically called a notice to quit or a demand for a possession, depending on if the homeowner is trying to recover past due rent or possession of the property itself. That is sent to the tenant by the landlord. For a non-payment situation, tenants then have 7 days to pay the past due amount or move. If they do not comply, then the landlord may file an eviction 7 days later. Once filed, the court schedules a hearing, sends a summons and complaint. Typically, it's about 7 to 10 days after they receive it in the mail that they will walk into that first hearing. Initial hearing is a pretrial conference, at which time the actual hearing is scheduled 7 days out from that point. Adding the initial pretrial was a product of a pandemic-era change that we did here in Grand Rapids, which has worked well in offering the tenant a bit more time to make arrangements, especially if they're seeking financial or other assistance through programs like EDI or eviction prevention. During the second hearing, a decision is reached on how to proceed. If a tenant does not appear for that second hearing, typically a default judgment in favor of the landlord is entered. That may also occur, however, at the first hearing if the tenant were personally served and handed the notice and then failed to appear at the first hearing. Conversely, if the outstanding payment has been received or if the tenant has moved out, the case may be dismissed. Or if there is an agreement or an arrangement that all litigants have agreed upon, the case may result in a conditional dismissal. That just means that as long as both parties hold up their end of whatever agreement they've reached, the case will ultimately be dismissed. However, if one of the parties does not follow through on their end of the deal, then the eviction case resumes at the point that it stopped. Most typically, a case will result in a judgment of some sort at the second hearing. If an agreement has not been reached and the overdue rent is still outstanding, the judge may enter a judgment in favor of the plaintiff. At that time, the tenant has 10 days to pay the overdue amount or exit the property. If they do not, the landlord returns to court to request that writ of eviction, and a court officer is then scheduled to go out to the home to evict the family. It is important to note, however, that even if a situation does not result in a formal eviction, many tenants are still ultimately displaced from their homes without many options on where to go. Additionally, an eviction filing can often limit a tenant in their new rental search just as much as a formal eviction could. That's due to companies who provide tenant background checks for landlords, often weighing eviction filings in the same way that they would weigh an eviction itself, regardless of the cause for the filing. Kathy will talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Avoiding that whole process is, or at the very least minimizing the negative impact on involved parties, is one of the primary purposes for our program. EDI inspires healthier communities and positive outcomes through creative collaboration rather than relying on litigation exclusively. Our aim is to empower program participants with the skills they need to consistently pay their rent each month in time and in full, or at the very least, navigate support systems on their own should they ever find themselves in a similar situation in the future. At the end of the day, landlords and tenants want very similar things: to have a home that is in good repair, rent for that home paid consistently in full and on time, and avoid any undue amount of stress or conflict on all involved parties for those things to happen. A little more about our program, what we specifically do. At the outset during creation, our aim was to include as many community partners as we could since we work in a very holistic capacity. We'll expound a bit more on that in a moment. But once those relationships were forged, our goal became to reach as many people who needed the help as we could in as little time as possible, which is still one of our primary goals. To accomplish that, we developed these informational flyers. We geared one towards tenants, one towards landlords, and this third one on the far right there goes out with every summons and complaint sent by the sent by the 61st District Court in any non-payment case. These are all available in English and Spanish, and adjusted for average reading level to ensure language inclusivity. We were also very intentional about where we distributed the flyers, targeting communities with higher filing rates within the city of GR. We largely focused on businesses such as local grocery and convenience stores, barbershops, beauty salons, laundromats, community centers, apartment complexes, other places of high traffic such as that. We also very deliberately targeted local nonprofits and community partner locations that are led and trusted by people of color, as the eviction crisis disproportionately impacts BIPOC communities. We'll share some numbers on that relevant to our city a bit later. EDI is not just a service for tenants. In order to build relationships with landlords and property managers, we developed relationships with the RPOA, that's the Rental Property Owner Association, and made sure to engage directly with apartment complex managers on site as we distribute informational flyers. We continue to forge new and strengthen existing relationships with landlords and property managers in order to reinforce that EDI has the potential to help everyone who's involved in this process, not just tenants exclusively. Our initial efforts appear to be well focused as we began receiving upwards of 15 to 20 calls per day in our initial couple months after we went live. Those numbers have dropped a bit more recently to average around 8 to 10 per day. We also receive a fair number of calls from those outside the city of Grand Rapids who we are not able to serve because our grant is limited to who's under jurisdiction of the 61st District Court. However, we don't turn anyone away. We would offer those callers the exact same resources as we would offer a someone who resides in the city of Grand Rapids. We just can't provide the follow-up case management and that sort of service to those callers. Resource referrals may include, but definitely aren't limited to, emergency rental or utility assistance, access to mediation services, information for legal aid, legal assistance center, fair housing information, financial counseling in the form of budget and credit building, housing resources, employment resources, food resources, homeless shelters and support services, and a number of other things. Resources are very individually targeted to what the family needs, not just eviction, because eviction is often accompanied by a lot of other things, obviously. And finally, another primary aspect of our program is the collection of data for use in future prevention efforts. Our hope is that the data we collect now will be a driver for continued efforts as we move forward in this work. Kathy will have a bit more on the data side of it in just a moment. So what does it look like? Typically, if someone is going through a situation, we like to catch them upstream. So even if they are not currently in the process, if someone calls and says, hey, I'm at risk, hey, I'm having trouble paying my rent, things like that, they can either call our phone line and leave their information or visit the court website and provide their contact information there. Well, Kathy or I then will contact them for the intake survey to begin that process. We review the information with the client to determine the areas of need, like I said, not just the emergency rental assistance, but what other areas their family may be struggling with, provide individualized local resource referrals, and then ongoing, I'll say limited case management support until resolution, because some families don't require that as much as other families. Some families require a lot more attention in certain areas. Other families will do great after receiving the resources and move forward. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kathy for some more of the data stuff.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thanks for staying with us so far. So what sets EDI apart? We look at early intervention. So while we work with clients at any stage of the eviction process, our focus is on upstream interventions, which more efficiently divert cases away from the court and connect parties to resources. The practice lessens the administrative burden on the courts by diverting cases away from dockets. If parties do resolve their non-payment dispute pre-court, or don't, I apologize, then they arrive to court with a greater understanding of what to expect and how to navigate through that process on their own. Eviction diversion programs that prioritize upstream efforts can avoid the negative impacts of court involvement, including a mark on the tenant's record that severely limits future housing opportunities, contributes to job loss, as well as declining mental and physical health. To coordinate access to legal and non-legal housing supports, we've established strong partnerships within the community, including Kent County Community Action, Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, the Dispute Resolution Center of West Michigan, with whom we have a close partnership for mediation prior to court involvement. Legal Aid of West Michigan, the Legal Assistance Center, Rental Property Owners Association, Housing Kent, the Salvation Army, Mel Trotter Ministries, Urban League of West Michigan, Access of West Michigan, Grand Rapids Housing Commission, Public Library System, and MSU Extension, including private landlords and landlord attorneys. We continuously work towards adding new partnerships where applicable. And recently, we've combined efforts with Housing Kent Housing Stability Alliance to initiate a community-wide effort identifying a county-wide coordinated eviction diversion system response. And of course, we require support from the bench and the staff at 61st District Court. We have support from our community partners and other stakeholders to enable us to explore creative solutions for a multifaceted, complex problem. Our data collection is improving our community understanding of who is really impacted by eviction and to what extent within the city of Grand Rapids. Our data analysis is assisted by Stout, a global investment and advisory firm providing services to EDI cohorts and at a pro bono capacity. With their assistance in monitoring, the EDI program currently aims to track more than 100 data points for each participating client. The data we are collecting is not currently being collected by other programs in the community, and our facilitators are gathering quantitative information to more accurately define where resources are needed within the jurisdiction of the city of Grand Rapids, with the hopes that it may be duplicated in other jurisdictions. Now, fun time. Let's examine the demographics collected from our first quarter. So nationwide, we know that Black and Hispanic renters in general and women in particular are disproportionately threatened with eviction and evicted from their homes disproportionately. We can see this disparate impact within our own community by looking at the race distribution across our program participants versus the population within the city of Grand Rapids. The pie chart on the left here examines the race distribution for the EDI program first quarter, where 62% of participants self-identified as Black. Whereas on the right, you will see the race distribution for the city of Grand Rapids, where only 18.4% of the population identify as Black. Other early indicators that we're seeing include employment instability as an early identifiable cause of eviction locally, as about half of our participants report being unemployed. We also see about 71% of our participants are families with children, with 80% of participants believe they can pay going forward if they're able to get caught up with assistance, and over half of our participants have some amount to pay towards back rent, which is all really great information to have while you're developing a program. Next, let's take a look at where we are currently. This is a visualization of eviction cases by quarter over a 5-year period from January 2018 to December 2022. Some things to keep in mind as you look at this visual is that the eviction prevention program pilot was conducted during that first 12 quarters, and that middle portion is where we experienced the moratorium on evictions. So despite the trending upward nature of eviction cases filed, that first yellow line at the very top, the number of eviction orders has remained lower than pre-pandemic levels, possibly due to the shift in mentality to work towards alternative dispute resolutions, which was aided by the ongoing work of the eviction prevention program. By tracking this data over time, stakeholders will be able to identify and implement timely policies and programs focused on stemming rising eviction rates while also evaluating whether our current interventions are having an impact on housing stability like we'd like to see. On this map, we can see how local eviction trends have shifted over time, gain insights into which populations or neighborhoods are disproportionately impacted by evictions, and what characteristics may be associated. Armed with this information, city leaders will be able to refine policies, programs, and outreach strategies to more effectively reach those households likely to be affected. The interesting thing to note here are the hot spots that kind of trail off into that 3rd Ward district. Certainly can see that as a high area of impact in our neighbor or in our city. Our objectives include awareness. As a community, we have a window of opportunity here to make changes to the way we discuss, plan for, and address eviction and homeless prevention. Increasing the knowledge to landlords and tenants about the process and about prevention strategies can serve to shift the mentality of well-meaning landlords and property managers that allow tenants to try to catch up over time, which results in a snowball effect on eviction costs, which become too high for traditional emergency rental assistance programs to abate. And assistance. As holistic facilitators, we're giving space for clients to feel seen, heard, and understood, providing them space to take control of addressing their needs through available community resources. So eviction is a multifaceted problem requiring a multifaceted response. As captured from researching national best practices over the last few months, we've seen these concepts time and time again. That the route to successful system change in eviction prevention requires investment in early intervention strategies, data collection to inform where advocacy is needed to affect change to address local needs, and to build engaged and empowered partnerships to try to carry out the work or a coordinated plan. Just a brief on what other states are doing in this area. As previously mentioned, early intervention to engage parties as soon as possible is key to successful programming. Mediation and increased representation require more time up front in the eviction process. Without changing that timeline in court, we can hope to target parties further upstream through marketing, education, and ordinances. To give an example of what other states are successfully doing, we can look at Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where they have a city ordinance requiring landlord good faith participation with the city's eviction diversion program. Before they may seek legal eviction through the courts, they have to provide information on mediation and access through targeted financial assistance. And as of January 2021, about 70% of those parties who participated in mediation reached an agreement for the tenant to stay in the unit. An additional 22% agreed on different outcomes, such as the tenant moving out, according to the report conducted by the Urban Institute. There are two other similar programs that instituted mediation as a pre-court requirement, Hawaii and Washington State. They both require mediation to be offered as an option to tenants prior to court filing, both requiring the tenant to be offered the option to pursue mediation for about 2 weeks. And if it's not pursued, then the landlord may resume as before. We look at sealing, record sealing or masking. Having an eviction record can increase the likelihood of chronic housing instability and job loss. Many landlords use tenant screening agencies to pull eviction history of tenants. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau report on tenant background checks identified that poor data collection methods used by these companies leads to misrepresentation of tenant eviction history. The dispute process for this misrepresentation is convoluted and difficult to navigate for renters. So sealing the record removes it from public view at the moment it is sealed and allows a tenant to legally say on a rental application that eviction never occurred, when that's the case. Over 31 eviction sealing and masking bills have been introduced nationwide with bipartisan support. It is especially important in eviction proceedings that an individual have access to an attorney because the stakes are so high. Right to counsel programs allow tenants to have access or to advocate who can help them through the process and potentially keep them housed. The long-term effects of homelessness cost the community up to 3 times what it costs to keep somebody housed. As of July 2022 in Michigan, 81% of landlords were represented in court versus only 5% of tenants. That's according to research conducted by the University of Michigan Poverty Law Program. Many studies demonstrate that these cities save far more money than it costs to run these programs by reducing the government expenditures on services such as homeless shelters, foster care, emergency health care, et cetera. Stunning results coming out of these cities with right to counsel for eviction include New York City, where 86% of the represented tenants remain in their homes. In San Francisco, about 67%. And in Cleveland, Ohio, 93% of represented tenants are avoiding eviction and or involuntary move-outs. A look at a simple SWOT analysis for our program. We see our strengths being great support from our bench and staff at the 61st District Court and the National Center for State Courts and their pool of resources, as well as our many community partners and stakeholders. Our weaknesses really include our general data collection, specifically the post-court results, trying to get that buy-in. opportunities. Are continuing to build on the momentum that the eviction prevention program started, and increasing this collaboration with the Housing Stability Alliance. Threats, of course, funding. Current positions are only funded for 1 and 2 years respectively.
All right, and I'm gonna ask you, we're almost out of time. We only have 30 seconds left, so I'm gonna ask you just to kind of wrap
sure,
up.
absolutely.
See if there's any final questions, and I know we're almost at the end of our meeting, so.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a final note here, our first quarter, looking at our key action items, our first quarter was about designing the program and making the community known of our existence. We moved into the work of our program during that second quarter, identifying improvement. And our third quarter moves us into the sustainability content of the work. How do we work ourselves out of this work? And together we've invested community partners. We're hoping to design and implement a coordinated countywide eviction diversion system. Our program will not solve this complex problem independently, but through intentional and well-directed partnerships, we hope to. So on that final note, just conclude the presentation for you. Any questions?
Thank you. This is all really great information, and thank you both for your work. I'll see if there's any questions or comments.
I want to quick apologize for the formatting. It did not look like that.
Oh, that's okay.
That we had, so that's a little bit.
It's totally fine. It's a lot of great information. I really appreciate it. Commissioners, colleagues around here, any additional questions or comments? All right. Commissioner Moody?
I do, but very quickly, if you can answer this, I appreciate the report from the 61st District Court on the evictions, but I just need to know one question. Where does the 61st District Court stand on squatters' rights when it comes to evictions?
That is a question I am unprepared to answer, but would happily look into and get back to you on.
Would you please do that?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. All right, well, I'll turn to my commissioner here, and then we'll close this. I know Ms. Behrens is going to give us a little update. Commissioner, you have a question?
Just was on the demographic piece, and we talked about this earlier today in another meeting, Mayor. It has the EDI program, and it has race, so black, white, other. Would it be possible in the future to get some data on Latino or Latinx? Like, I know that's obviously could be multiracial or one race, but that would be helpful to understand so it can kind of map some of our demographic information. Thanks.
Yes, that's good insight. Is that possible? Do you capture that? It is? Okay. So maybe if that's something you could also send to us as a follow-up, that would be great. All right. And thank you. Thank you again. Our Deputy City Manager is just going to give us a very brief update about some recent community engagement sessions that we had, and then I'll close this public safety meeting.
Yes, very quickly. So I just want to say thank you. We did host the community engagement sessions that we anticipated and had talked about several times with the committee last week. We got good turnout across 2 events and a couple focus groups, probably 120 to 150 participants. We are in the process of working with NCL, who helped us set up those engagements to digest the feedback, and anticipate coming back to your April meeting with some analysis of how those themes link up with some of the programs and efforts we have already talked to you about to help you with your assessment of where we stand.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate your work on that. Go ahead.
I'd just like to make a comment about the engagement meetings. I had the opportunity to go on Wednesday, and I sat with a really great group of people at a table. A lot of them were from downtown business. I was surprised that the conversation all was about the homeless issue, because I thought it was about the safety in Grand Rapids issue. But it was very apparent that nobody knows what the city of Grand Rapids has already done about the issue and how much money has been put forth and all the departments that are working on this issue. Because so without that knowledge, their feedback to me would not have been that helpful, because they're not looking at it to see what the holes are, what's already done. They were giving feedback about things that the community, the city, has already, instituted. So that was very confusing to me. I don't know. I don't know how productive that meeting will be, but certainly when you digest it all, you'll know. But I don't know. I just thought it would have been better to have the city give a 20-minute presentation on what is already being done, and then how can the community help expand that. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, it's good feedback. I do think there's a lot of work that we're doing that people are not aware of, unfortunately. Do you want to speak to that?
Sorry, it's good feedback, and I think we heard several of those themes. We definitely did not communicate about or invite folks to the intent behind it was really to get the broader themes of what does safety mean to members of the community, to get that broader perspective for a variety of reasons. I think attendees believed it was a conversation about, do we need more ordinances specifically related to the unhoused for a variety of reasons. But I do think that the themes of the feedback we'll be able to hopefully link that up to what we're doing and some lessons learned, including education and transparency about things we already are doing.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Any final comments before I close? All right. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you.